This room was never in very good order, and at the moment it was more chaotic than usual because a fermenting bottle on the highest shelf had exploded. A fizzy liquid was rapidly effervescing from the stub. Chunks of blue glass at high velocity had smashed other bottles, or driven deep into the paneling, and the neck of the exploded bottle, still with the cork in it, had knocked one of the cages off its hook. It had crashed open on the badly stained parquetry, where a dozen mice were now running loose. Some scampered through Breeny's legs when she opened the door, and vanished under pieces of furniture, as one might expect a mouse to do, but others exhibited unusual behavior, like cartwheels, or else they took no notice of her at all, preferring to narcissistically straddle fragments of a pocket mirror, smooth their whiskers, and cheep fondly to themselves. Even some of the mice that ran away, if you were quick enough to get a look, seemed to have something slightly off about them. One mouse, which actually glowed, was very lucky to live in a run-down mansion, and not in a region frequented by hungry owls. Breeny hopped into a pair of partially melted rubber galoshes, and endeavored to clean up the mess with a whisk broom. While she was sweeping, a white mist began to stream from the cracks under the baseboards. A compact fog, with the suggestion of a white powdered wig floating on top, gradually distinguished itself from the room's other, less determinate smokes and hazes. In a distant, creaking, groaning voice, like floorboards settling in a neighboring room, the house spirit gasped in indignation. "Breeny," he croaked, quivering his misty form, "must you keep up such a destructive hobby? This whole house, and I'm surprised it is still standing, could hear that." Like any house spirit, Dominic could, if he chose, coalesce into a more or less solid form, with pointed ears and a spiffy uniform. At some point in the distant past, he had presumably made himself useful carrying salvers of fruit drinks at garden parties. Many of his colleagues served their households pretty dutifully, and Breeny's father, when he was in the mood to keep up appearances, would sometimes make Dominic materialize in order to make him bring things, coffee with milk or the morning mail on a silver tray. The house spirit himself, however, insisted that he was too decrepit to maintain solid form, and he had not done it very often or very reliably for as long as Breeny could remember. Sometimes, as if to prove his point, he would lapse into fog, just when it would cause a hot beverage to spill into the lap of Malachi's dressing gown. Dominic's only really useful occupations were those he could comfortably carry out without assuming material form. For instance, he would drift through the walls and rafters, looking for the bats and squirrels that set up house there, and torment them so vigorously with weird noises and fearsome nighttime apparitions that they abandoned their nests and sought new accommodation in houses with less forbidding supernatural guardians. In fact, the Locks were lucky Dominic did anything at all. Many spirits serving families in similarly reduced circumstances had withdrawn entirely from physical reality, and, having become inoffensive domestic specters, haunted chests and attics and other obscure places. In the most abandoned sections of the city, it was said, the house spirits had grown completely wild. Squatters in ruined buildings might be subjected to spirits gone savage and fond of madcap caprices, even cruel tricks like tucking live coals into people's bedding or careering unpredictably in front of their feet while they were carrying boiling water. It was rumored that some structures were so beyond repair that their spirits had abandoned them entirely and roamed outlying districts making mischief. Dominic, despite his quirks and complaints, would do small favors for the members of the household if the favors were not too much trouble. For example, when Breeny first began her experiments, he had, instead of simply annoying mice until they left of their own accord, agreed to herd them into Breeny's closet so she could test her poisons and potions on them. Breeny, who was more attentive to such points than Sam was, had deduced that their father's darkening moods frequently coincided with the disappearance of silver sets and heirloom tapestries. Save only some indispensable furniture, like the beds and the kitchen table, Malachi's mirror, and Samuel's lock collection, there was very little in the house now that could be sold for any sum of money. Malachi had become bleak, and the theme had lately crept into his conversation that marriage to a rich man of good family was a greatly desirable thing. Breeny had therefore concluded that her father looked on her as an investment to be cashed in once she had matured, and she had shifted some of her mental energies to the task of making a poison with which she might, if worst came to absolute worst, kill herself. Like many people 19 years of age, Breeny was of a melodramatic turn of mind, and her imagination caught fire with the possibilities. Even after she had strung a little vial of powerfully venomous poison on a chain about her neck, she went on with ever-waxing enthusiasm to produce more fatal substances than any one girl could possibly find useful. neurotoxins and necrotoxins and hemotoxins, and powders that caused baldness or epilepsy, and tinctures that caused red spots or horrible itching sensations on the insides of the elbows. Indeed, her compounds did all sorts of things, though not always the things that Briony expected. To make matters worse, she had tested them only on house mice, and it can be very difficult to ascertain from a mouse's behavior whether, for instance, a love potion has had the effect intended, although she thought it had, the mouse in question having quite lost its appetite, preferring to preen its whiskers and emit mournful, rhythmic cheeps that may have been poetry. Her father took little interest in her private life, nor indeed in anything he could not see in his wardrobe mirror, but Briony's life was in its broad outlines so controlled that she was glad to have a secret. So she was very startled when she heard his voice calling her to dinner from the hallway and rapping imperiously on her door, startled in part because she feared discovery, but mostly because she mistrusted the conversation to come.